The Unknowable Domain is the latest of the Simulated Universe expansion modules and tells us a brand new story about the interstellar energy war, the Scholar Strife and the struggles of the Scholars of the Intelligentsia Guild. But even though during this time period there has been a lot less direct interference from the Eons, this story may be the most complicated out of all three expansion modules combined. Our story starts right after the events of Golden Gears and the Mechanical Emperor Wars. Emperor Rupert II has died at this point, and has left behind one of his most important devices, the Scepter System. Different from Rupert I, Rupert II was an organic lifeform, so originally he didn't have any mechanical parts, which is why he created the Scepter System as a second brain, expanding his cognition to become inorganic as well. After his destruction, the Intelligentsia Guild quickly claimed the Scepter System for themselves. However, they immediately ran into a big problem. Since the power of the scepters was limited, what should they be used for? And who would gain the rights to use them? To solve this issue fairly, they held a congress at the planet of fairness and debate, Saipohia, where the different schools and scholars of the guild could argue and make points for why and how the power of the scepters should be used. At first, the chief scholar of the Astral Ecology School, Stander Dahl, proposes the idea of focusing all of the scepter's power onto a single individual, thereby making them a scholar comparable to a genius, since according to him, the findings of a single genius far outweigh the research of a million mediocre scholars. Of course, he would be willing to sacrifice himself for this noble cause. Needless to say, the other scholars in the guild weren't very pleased with him, and the only response to his arrogance were curses and disapproving stares. However, the School of Interstellar Energy Resources quickly offered another suggestion: to use the power of the scepters to figure out the four grand cosmic conundrums the guild has been struggling with: energy source, life, integration, and future. So, between the two options the scholars were given, the latter was obviously better, as that would allow every scholar to obtain at least a bit of the scepter's power, as long as their research was somewhat connected to one of those subjects. Of course, the scholars affiliated with the bigger schools would have access to more power than the independent scholars, but something was at least better than nothing. A certain independent researcher, Batavia Adler Somerville, was researching the imaginary space, which is basically a higher dimension on which our physical dimension is locked, just like how lily pads drift inside of a lake. Batavia was specifically interested in the quantum waves traveling through that lake, because she had observed a certain impossible anomaly in her readings. A certain frequency always appeared every 13 minutes, no matter where she conducted her readings. So, needless to say, the power of the scepters could also potentially further her research by miles, if she had enough access to the scepter system. This is the point where everything becomes complicated and kind of starts happening at the same time. Remember the four grand cosmic conundrums the Intelligentsia Guild wanted to solve? Well, they are trying to solve them all at the same time, with different schools working on the different conundrums. The first conundrum, future, was being handled by the Quantum History School, and focused on finding a method to accurately predict everything in the universe by calculating where every particle was at any given point in time. Because if you know everything there is to know about the present, it's simple to extrapolate what is yet to come in the future. The second conundrum, energy source, was the target of the School of Interstellar Energy Resources, together with the IPC's R&D Technology Department. Because of the scarcity of energy sources, the IPC invested enormous amounts of money into the development and discovery of new energy sources, such as drilling, energy storage, and energy detection. However, most of their funds still went into their own R&D department in order to use the scepters and create better and more efficient ways of obtaining energy. The third conundrum, life, was the main objective of the School of Evolutionary Perfection. They wanted to use the calculation power of the scepters to create the ultimate life form, a being that was the perfect mix between organic and inorganic life forms to overcome both their weaknesses, with their main focus being the creation of the perfect scholar, a fairly straightforward goal in comparison to the other schools. And lastly, the fourth conundrum, integration, was the focus of the School of Pure Creation, under leadership of the chief scholar Molay. They wanted to find a method to deconstruct matter down to the smallest building blocks of the universe and reconstruct them into something else. To do that, they first had to figure out how everything in the universe works. From paths to curios, and even the very building blocks of matter itself. Sadly, this conundrum needed way more computational power than they had access to at this point. So they needed to negotiate with smaller researchers to overtake their part of the scepter system, with one of their targets being scholar Batavia Adler Somerville. Even though she only received access to 1/10,000th of a scepter's computational power, she slowly but surely inched closer to the truth behind this impossible occurrence of the quantum waves. Chief Scholar Molay needed the scepters to be physically linked to each other, because their core unit, Emperor Rupert II, was gone, and with his death, the scepters were isolated from each other. Batavia begged and pleaded for more time with Molay's research team, and when the scepter was forcibly warp-jumped away from Batavia's lab, the carefully designed lab environment collapsed, and with it, years of her research was destroyed in the process. Because of this immense setback, Batavia's research came to a screaming halt, and after an unfortunate series of failed experiments, she lost all of her investors. In the end, Batavia had no other choice than to forfeit her authority over her 1/10,000th computational power. Batavia was only one of many independent scholars who went through something similar. And this all was the start of the Scholar Strife. Basically a chaotic string of events, where the major schools failed their objectives and the independent scholars started a mass protest against the Intelligentsia Guild for their unfair practices and monopoly on knowledge. Meanwhile, Chief Scholar Molay had successfully gathered dozens of scepters and physically linked them together. But he immediately ran into a new problem. Even though he had tried to create a complete neural network with these scepters, for some reason he couldn't actually activate it. The only answer Molay got from the scepters was silence. Eventually, with the IPC's technology department's help, it was uncovered that the only way to fully utilize them was with the help of a core, basically a command center which can issue commands to the scepters directly, which was originally the role of Rupert II. The only problem was, there was not a single shred of information regarding the core inside of the scepters. No location, function, or even access points. Even though Molay messed up in his experiments, he was far from the last. Even the School of Evolutionary Perfection created their own struggles, and failed in an even more spectacular way. Just like they had planned before, they tried to create the perfect fusion between organic and inorganic lifeforms to create the perfect scholar. Horrifying experiments were conducted on test subjects in order to achieve that fusion. One of the mechanical parts that was used on the test subjects was the Rupert Empire Mechanical Cogwheel Curio. For those who don't know, the curio contains Emperor Rupert's memories and allows the wielder to grasp his intentions. Which is... why would you inject pure murderous intent into a test subject? So, anyway, to nobody's surprise, this went horribly wrong. And the test subject copied the cognition and directives of one of Emperor Rupert's elite soldiers called Manic, the Emperor's Blade. Immediately, Manic rushed for the scepter's access point and uploaded a frequency into the scepter. This frequency spread itself through the comms network of the School of Evolutionary Perfection, turning every researcher who heard it into a copy of Manic himself. So now, tens of thousands of scholars thought of themselves as inorganic elite soldiers under Emperor Rupert's command. They immediately declared war upon the guild, and in order to prevent this new anti-organic equation to spread further, the guild cut the infected scepters off and put them under strict surveillance for the rest of their lives. The IPC used this incident as an excuse to reduce the amount of funds the schools got, and instead funneled their funds into the School of Interstellar Energy Resources. So, while all of this was happening in the major schools, the independent researchers like Batavia were fed up with the blatant corruption and unfair practices of the Intelligentsia Guild. So, as a statement, they protested at the Great Cosmic Library Ismael. The armed archaeologists of the guild were keeping the protesters out of the library using non-lethal weapons and paralysis fields. But as the conflicts grew more intense, and the protesters were about to break through the blockade, the archaeologists made a huge mistake as they fired their weapons into the paralysis field, which caused a huge chain reaction. As a result, the warp gate was blown to pieces. So now, with the library completely isolated from the rest of the universe, the protesters could easily take over the library, which was extremely important to the guild. Now the scholars had the perfect position to all work together and assist each other with their research. So they made unprecedented progress and discovered many things. Of course, one of those scholars was the unstoppable absolute unit, Batavia Anders Sommerville. With the help of another scholar, Batavia discovered that the mysterious rippling signal originated from a point in physical space, which leaked the signal into the imaginary space. The reason why this wave always had the same interval of 13 minutes is because the wave was unaffected by anything, neither space nor time. This new theory was called the solitary wave theory, and it would become the reason for one of the most important expeditions in the history of the universe. If you remember the 4 cosmic conundrums from the very beginning, the 4th one, future, could be solved using this theory. If you can find the source of the signal, you could use it as an anchor point to form a model simulating the movement of the fabric of reality itself, thereby proving whether the future of the universe is random or predetermined. So Batavia set off alone and determined to find the source of the signal and solve not only the mystery of the signal, but also the truth behind the 4th cosmic conundrum. While all of this was happening, the Scholar's Strife slowly approached its boiling point. With the Great Library Ismael taken by the independent scholars, and the major schools forcefully taking over the scepters, the Intelligentsia Guild began falling apart. Most notably, the School of Relative Cognition started a movement against collective knowledge. They argued that knowledge is a fabricated lie, created by the Intelligentsia Guild in order to control what the masses are allowed to know. After all, how can you know for certain that something is correct if you cannot check it for yourself? After traversing through all of this chaos, Batavia's ship arrived at her destination, the Iron Throne, the seat of the previous mechanical emperor Rupert II. But Batavia's tracing model didn't point towards the throne itself, rather to a point circling the throne. It turned out that Rupert II had hidden his most prized possession wrapped in imaginary energy, the Scepter System core. When she realized this, everything became a lot clearer. Rupert II had created the Scepter System to be able to answer any question by himself. So he never gave them the function to ask questions by themselves. This, combined with his cognition expanding to become both organic and inorganic, made him the perfect scholar. So, simply put, since Batavia had now access to the core, she too could ask them to expand her mind and become a perfect scholar, simply by connecting her consciousness to the core and crowning herself. And so she did. As soon as she connected herself, all of the scepters in the universe reformed into a complete nervous system, her brand new mechanical brain. However, right before she was about to ask the scepters to crown her, she started doubting herself. Is a Mundanite worthy enough to be crowned? Was she smart enough to do this? She is not a genius, but a normal scholar. Sadly, her doubts were stronger than her, and instead of using the scepters to crown herself, she used them to gaze into the thoughts of the Eon of Erudition, Nous. As she looked at Nous's thoughts, she saw everything she had researched up until that point. From the anomalous ripple in her research, to the wuthering waves, rippling waves present in the imaginary background. But then she ran into a problem. She simply could not comprehend the knowledge in front of her. As if possessed, she started to write down everything she could in that moment, asking an almost infinite amount of questions from the scepters in order to make everything make sense. Because of the immense workload put on the scepters, one by one they all ceased functioning, and 0.1 seconds later, all of the scepters were reduced to scrap metal. Because the scepters were now useless, The conflicts within the Intelligentsia Guild died down, and all of the schools started working together again. There were no more unfair advantages to be had, no more information being controlled, and no more research to be done on the 4 cosmic conundrums. This was the end of the Scholar Strife. But it was far from useless, since there were 2 very important things gained from all of this. First of all, the knowledge Batavia had uncovered from gazing into Noose's thoughts, combined with her research, led to the discovery of the solitary waves theory, which would later be solved by Herta. And last but not least, the sad truth was uncovered that a Mundanite can simply never become a genius, since even after looking into Noose's mind and receiving their gaze, Batavia did not ascend to the next level. Of course, she might have become a perfect scholar if she had crowned herself at the Scepter's core, but sadly we will never know what consequences that would have had. Anyway, that was the entire main storyline of the Unknowable Domain. I hope you enjoyed it. Have a good one. Bye!